Hello, welcome to Loremaster's Lair. I am the Loremaster, here after a long weekend of reading everything. Well, skimming. I do not have the time in my life to read 5 books in a week, especially since I am just borrowing them. Either way, we had a few new gods in Margin Expanse, a few names in the Ruby Phoenix Tournament books, and no full god write-ups. Well, I appreciate what we got, and I'm here to continue bringing together tidbits of a god we have been with for just a little while longer. This time, old Deadeye himself, Erastil, god of family, farming, hunting, and trade. First, where can you find information on Erastil? First, as usual, both editions have their own gods and magic for the basics. As for adventure paths, Erastil gets his full write-up in Kingmaker's second book, Rivers Run Red. One book I have been forgetting to mention in these god videos is the campaign book Azlanti Gods, a collection of the write-ups of the main 20 gods, but most of the lore information is repeated from that of the adventure path, so I just tend to think of those first instead. It does have all the information in one place, and it does include the obedience and related mechanisms, so I do recommend it, especially since Paizo would not likely do full write-ups on these gods again unless there's a massive lore change. Another book, we continue with the companion books Faith series with Faiths of Purity, a book that gives information on worship of good gods and information like the Paladin codes, among others. We also will be using another companion book I enjoy, The Path of Purity, for information on one kind of follower of Erastil. Finally, as per usual, Plano Adventures has the most complete information about Erastil's Divine Realm, as well as Divine Realms of other gods. Erastil is one of the oldest gods we know of, early markers of his appearance being created before the Azlanti Empire. Erastil is said to be a god who stands halfway between the Green Faith followed by the Druids and the gods of civilization. He is a god worshipped by small farming communities, of shepherds, of hunters, and the like. It is said he is responsible for crafting the first bow and granting it to humans. He is an interesting example of a lawful good god in that he does not work to inspire his people to go out and face evil. He instead works to inspire them to live simple lives. However, as god of community, evil that comes to interrupt people's simple lives will find a fight on their hands. Let us start off with his appearance. Erastil usually appears as a humanoid. Depending on who looks at him, he either appears as a human or a halfling. Either way, he appears as a hunter-trapper, the human being of orphan or killed ethnicity. Alternatively, he is also worshipped by stone giants, who refer to him as Istrig the Hunter, depicting him as a typical stone giant wearing fur clothing. I don't know why it's stripped 3 times in one sentence. Speaking of alternate names, in the Lands of the Lenorm Kings he is referred to by the name Olostal. The only difference from the normal depiction is that he is often shown wearing skis, the best way to travel up north. Finally, when he stands to protect his people, he appears with the head of an elk, or a reindeer in northern communities. There are depictions of a humanoid with antlers dating back to the time of the Azlanti Empire, so he was likely worshipped even back then, though we lack records of such. His followers are not known for their art, so most artwork of him tends to be just simple carvings or drawings by those outside his faith, who do prefer to draw him in elk-headed battle. His followers will, however, collect shed antlers as a way to represent his blessings. His domain is over animals and plants not protected by Gazra, those which are domesticated by humans. the creatures which farmers, hunters, and ranchers tend to use to feed their people. People-wise, his domain is over close-knit communities and families. He is big on families, which will become more and more apparent as we continue. He also has a large connection to hunting, though not hunting for sport but for food. Maybe sport second, but mostly food. The common followers of Erastil are farmers, tradesmen, ranchers, etc., who just want to live their lives. Family men, focused on treasure hunting, rowing, or dealing with some distant king. They do not want more than a good crop and a fat pig. And family. Erastil is strongly pro-marriage, and harshly dislikes adultery or divorce. It is a way to, direct quote, tame unruly men and women. Another commonality in these followers is that they tend to collect shed horns of elk, seeing them as gifts from the god. Despite again not being the largest artists, they tend to decorate their walls in various antlers. They also make tools from these antlers, and even children might have a knife made from antler. When broken down by class, most of his priests are still clerics, but many of them are instead druids or rangers, and though rare because of his preference for peace, paladins. In addition, the book Paths of the Righteous gives us examples of a special follower of goodly deities, with Erastil having the Hitherlander. These specialized rangers are made to work in the environment of villages of 2,000 people, or areas cleared for farmland instead of the deep wilds. They are more focused, their favorite enemies being unnatural creatures that would disrupt the simple farm folk in particular. That said, not all of his followers just stay home. Another group, the Banner of the Stag, are those who would leave their small villages to find other small villages without anyone to protect them. First from the nation of Morthun, small bands of these warriors tend to be found all around Lake Akarthan. For priests of Erastil, they tend to be indistinguishable from the normal worshiper at first glance, taking the time to till their own land and shepherd their sheep. One distinguishing mark that maybe is that he's just doing more, using the blessings of Erastil to help take care of work the village in general needs done, or work in place of the sick or otherwise indisposed. The priest would also be in charge of expelling someone who does not, we'll call it, fit in, pointing someone who does not belong in a sleepy village to a nearest city. Because of Erastil's preferring to work with small groups of congregations, at most two priests will work in the same village. And when a traveling priest enters a village, they tend to defer to the authority of the local priests. In terms of churches, in most towns the building functions as a meeting hall or storage shed, which in turn usually has the local priest taking part in related meetings. Even in large cities, an out-of-place wooden building built like a hunting lodge is the best guess of which building the Erastilians might meet in. Inside there is a healthy lack of the usual trappings one associates with a temple, instead furnished with simple tables and stools, despite the fact that most people stand anyway. Shrines are simple, usually just a carving of horns or a bow in an out-of-the-way place. Moving on, a look at the divine realm of the Stag God, the Summerlands. This territory is on the fourth layer of heaven, a place where those who do not take part in the rest of the planetary crusade and instead just desire to live an idealized pastoral afterlife live. Technically, the entirety of the fourth layer is under the control of Erastil, who assists the actual Guardian and the but just focusing on the Summerlands, This is a wide forest with various rivers flowing through the landscape, a series of small villages being where the petitioners reside. There are few places large enough to be called cities, but these mostly function to facilitate trade, both with the Acrons of heaven and the dwarven pantheon below. Again, Eristil's followers do not take part in the armies of heaven, doing their part by instead making sure the homeland is safe and well tilled. Now let's go through some miscellaneous parts of the faith. For where Erastil is worshipped, it is anywhere where small communities can be found. Specifically, it can be found in areas far from where most Talons or Chilaxian people think of as civilization. In the land of the Norm Kings, Varisia, the River Kingdoms, and a little more south in the Manor Wastes. Even in Chiliax, there are small towns outside of the city centers where Erastil worshippers can be found, including its current territories of Isgor and its former territories of Andran, Gaunt, Morthun, and Nomathus. For holidays, Erastil worshippers are those who focus on duty and hard work. But there are some days in which they find cause for celebration. Archer Feast is a day where followers of the Elk God show off their skills with the bow and arrow. The trial is getting harder and harder until only one remains. There was also opportunities for feasts and music during Planting Week and the Harvest Feast. Eristil's holy text is the Parables of Erastil, a straightforward book that works as an almanac, has a collection of many simple fables, and is full of advice on how to plant certain crops, track game animals, and the like. Local communities are encouraged to remove chapters of the book if the advice is not useful to their area. Now we are getting close to the end of our topics, but you might have noticed something is missing. That's right. Better late than never. Let's start with today's first side tangent. The part of the show where we put another book on the reading pile. Today, it's the book The Divine Anthology, a book which lists various in-universe books. I mentioned a few times in the past, and today we are coming back to talk about another Divine Fighting Manual. While the Parables of Erastil focus on the pastoral works of a community, the book Horns of the Elk is devoted purely to archery. From the most simple of techniques for beginners to the most advanced techniques, it is a good instruction manual for anyone to improve their shot. The book is one of the most common divine fighting manuals, easily found in any place the Temple of Erastil can be found. Finally, let's look at relationships with other deities. He's on good terms with the rest of the good deities, despite being on the reserve side. He does, however, tend to offer them advice, mostly about marriage. How the women need to find a good husband, how the playboy gods need to find a good wife to settle them down, how he respects Torag for his family. I mean, the examples are more than just marriage, but reading through all of these, it's mostly marriage. As for his followers, they are all protectors of the wild. We have Aragon, the resurrected spirit of a paladin of Eristil's famed horse, hair the color of rubies. He carries the lost out of forests and can offer himself as a mount to Eristil's followers. There is Blackfeather, a man who takes the form of somewhere between a man and an eagle, who is a skilled archer. Words tonight. He is known to perch on rooftops to watch for potential dangers to villages. Scorchbark, a young treant, with his bark scorched from battles with devils. To this day, fire shakes him, but is not enough to deter him from a fight. And finally, Eristil's herald, the grim white stag, a powerful deer which Erastil attempted to hunt, eventually resulting with the two of them becoming friends. He has existed since time immemorial, being a protector of the wild since Golarian's earliest days, and being on the same level as the parents of some of the current main gods. Now at this point you might notice I am close to my usual end with 3 side tangents still up my sleeve. That is because of one thing that Erastil stands for, one that has come up throughout this whole video: family. Erastil, as he is, of course has a family big enough to fill up a few side tangents. Maybe more, but most of these do not have full write-ups yet, so there's only so long I can draw them out at this point in time. So let's get started. First, at side tangent 2, we have his wife, Jaidi. While Erastil was just cave paintings incidentally related to the time period of the Azlanti, Jaidi was one of their main gods of the era. She served as a goddess of agriculture, hard work, and self-sufficiency. She was the person who taught mortals how to farm the land and tame the wilds for themselves, giving them ways to build their own lives instead of simply relying on the gods to do everything for them. Most of her followers were traders and farmers, working to promote the good of the community. When Earthfall happened, these followers did all they could to protect the remaining human civilizations, with limited results. But results nonetheless. In modern times, she is relatively minor in terms of deities, she only being worshipped in small communities, with the only real exception being a decent number of chefs keeping a small shrine to her in their kitchens. Next, continuing on with his family, we have side tangent number 3, children of Erastil and Jaidi. They have 2 children, Halkamora and Kuranos. Halkamora is the ephemeral lord of gardens, orchards, and wine. She appears as a young woman, skin tanned from walking in the sun, feet covered in dirt and wine stains. Pretty normal. However, as an Agathion, she needs at least some animal features, having wings and antennae of ladybug. She is worshipped by farmers, gardeners, and winemakers, and wine drinkers, and claims small gardens, parks, and wineries as her domain as separate from her parents. Temples to powerful nature deities tend to have small side shrines to her. She is peaceful with most deities, the only exceptions being insect-bodied fiends. Her domain is found deep in Nirvana's forest of whispering longing, despite the fact that she prefers to visit others' courts instead of spend time in her own. Her brother Ceranos, the ephemeral lord of fertility, seasons, and wild animals. He is an Azata, officially spreading the family across the entirety of the good axis. He appears as a tan elven man with antlers. While the rest of his family are often peaceful, he and his followers take an active role in hunting the evil beings who despoil nature. He has good outsiders of all kinds serve as his advisors, aka the people who physically need to hold him back whenever he gets angry enough to try to march on an evil plane himself. His domain is a palace of trees intertwining in the middle of a deep forest, named Bow, a place with healing springs. In times of war, his domain serves as the main hospital for good-aligned outsiders. Finally, side tangent 4, the man of traditional morals and family has a second family to talk about. Gods are gonna be gods. Either way, there are 2 gods related to Erastil through the stone giant pantheon. First, Fandara, the Blood Mother, served as his first wife. She is the fertility goddess of stone giants, their mother, and goddess of vengeance when needed. Through the marriage between Stag and Farara, they gave birth to the entirety of the stone giant race. And dire bears, apparently. The other, and the only of the 5 new side tangents that has his own actual write-up, is Mindahal, the lawgiver. Mindahal is the smith god for the giants, and a traditionalist to the point Erastil thinks he is old-fashioned. Mindahal and Fadara have neutral, respectful relationships with each other, while Erastil considers the smith to be the black sheep of the family. Speaking of Mindahal as an individual, he is usually portrayed as a bearded stone giant elder, usually wielding his warhammer, the weight of tradition. He teaches that his way is the best way, and to go against change is the best option. During the Thessalonian era, he instructed his followers to follow the Rune Lords for power and political influence. However, the stone giants in general became resentful of him for selling out their kind, with most except for the most evil stone giants turning against him. And in the last few hundred years, the god Urazra and his followers, the Bear cult, have been taking even these followers away from him, his worship becoming less and less by the generation. His divine realm is Stone Peak, a mountain chain which exists on the edge of the first layer of hell, providing a barrier between the infernal realm and Axis. His holy text is 100 sacred stones, each stone used for the writing made on specially designed stones. They're also remembered in music for times when stones cannot be carried with them. And that is it for this week. A nice, simple, family-friendly episode. Now that we have done a god of green lands, simple living, and the natural world, next week we'll be covering none of that. Or the week after. 2 ideas for videos coming, and whichever comes out next week depends on what I feel like for the next week. Will the video coming out be the one I was hinting towards with my outro? We'll see.